if you are here for what's cool in comics, you are in the right place. My name is LP Kindred. I am a writer, editor, teaching artist of speculative fiction from Black and gay identities. I'm also a lifelong comic books nerd, and so I'm super excited to have this conversation with other comic book fans, creators. Just like we're gonna get in there. So before we get in there, I just like to go around my screen and ask people to give a short description of who they are, as well as what their into comic books is, whether that's as a creator, as a lifelong fan like my raggedy ass, or a combination of the two. Tell me what it is. To my right is George. So let's start with George.
Hi everyone, I'm George Drage. I'm the American creator of the Shad Hadid series. So I write regular long form novels, especially children's literature, but I'm also a comics creator. And so my forthcoming graphic novel, Tarek's Bizarre Adventure, is forthcoming with Harper Alley in 2025. So a little ways away, but comics take a while to make. So yeah, I'm into the whole comics scene and LP, I don't know if you wanted me to get into any of that right now or just introductions.
Oh, go ahead and tell us what your in is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I'm into a mix of contemporary and fantasy right now, and if you can blend the two, you get my attention right away. And so that's kind of what I try and do in my own creation. I think that right now, contemporary comics are really exploding all over the place just because of how accessible they are. So really into that right now.
Beautiful. I'm gonna move into CAP. Cap. How do you want me to talk to you? Address you?
Cap Works.
Cap works. Okay, Cap, please.
Hi, I'm Cap Ward. I'm a queer black cartoonist and illustrator, kind of working out of Richmond, Virginia. And I guess I came to comics originally as a fan. I've just read them since I was a kid. I've always been into art and writing, but it did not occur to me to combine the two until a much later age. But I make them now, and I've been making them for a few years.
And that brings us to Sloan.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Sloan. I am a trans Korean Tall Evie illustrator, comic artist, and tattooer. My in on comics started when I was like 5 or something. My brother used to buy tons of comics back in Korea and brought them home all the time. And I just grew up stealing all his comics and reading a bunch of stuff I really should not have been reading at my age. But yeah, just like kept reading comics all the way through and then ended up making my own at some point, I guess. Yeah.
Love that. Um, Great. Access permissions. Okay. So just a heads up, folks. I've let the panelists know, but I guess I should speak about it in this space. I like to throw up a Google Doc for permissions. Permissions. God, I can't speak and do two things at the same time. I like to throw up a Google Doc so that people who are in the space can throw in anything we say here so that afterward you have a document that you can refer to like, oh, so-and-so said this thing, and then everyone can have it. You can continue to have a conversation on this. I'm not going to get rid of this anytime soon. Give me 1 second while I open the permissions on it so anyone with the link can do the thing. Anyone with the link can edit, and the world is a beautiful place. Okay, great. Now we're going to start with questions. Okay, so what was your first what the hell moment you had with comics, and how wide did that comic or sequence blow your mind?
So, as a kidlit creator, I'm just gonna jump in and say that I've had obviously many, like I'm sure all of us have. I would say like my first, right? My first going way back was reading manga, especially Naruto and Dragon Ball. I was just, as a kid, my mind was blown that so many emotions can be conveyed so well and in a way that, while I have this book in front of me, it feels like I'm straight up watching it on the television and it's just as good, if not better, than that medium. So I was really excited there. I would say lately, in children's literature, Jerry Craft wrote this book, New Kid, and it's become a series. And the way in which he captured his experience as an African American and was able to really just appealed to everybody with it was really like a mind explosion for me as an Arab American creator, and it made me really excited to try and emulate that in some way using my own experiences.
Kat, did you want to go first?
Yes, sorry. Um,
Okay.
I think probably my first, like, wow, what the hell is going on here situation with comics was probably Kaiju no Kodomo or Children of the Sea by Daisuke Igarashi. There's a particular sequence, I think it's in the second volume, where the main characters, Ruka and Umi, are like just passing through a forest. And at the moment, Umi, for narrative reasons, is nonverbal at the time, but somehow the two of them are still able to communicate without any gaps in understanding. And it's just a really beautiful moment of the two of them searching for the ocean and Umi's brother. And it's just a really peaceful, well-rendered moment, but it also felt exactly like all of the times that I've been hiking with like my own loved ones, just like passing through the forest looking for the light on the other side. And it's just like a small 2-page sequence, but I still go back to it when I get stumped on comics. It's just a really beautiful moment.
For me, I think I've had, I guess, multiple instances. I don't know if I'd say that it like blew my mind, but just kind of helped me expand my horizons. Where, I think the first instance was because I grew up on stuff like Naruto and Dragon Ball, like you said, George. Um, when I started reading stuff by Otomo Katsu, no, like yeah, Otomo Katsuhiro, when first read Akira, it just the technical detail in his cityscapes and just in his environments, along with the amount of detail in the facial work and the expressions and everything, just kind of like yeah, like it just seems like so much work, and I was like, I can't believe that anyone would put that much effort into making something like this and so many panels across so many volumes. And then after that, I started expanding my horizons some more, and then I started reading Taiyo Matsumoto, and I think it was number 5. And he just has these beautiful scenes where just like long stretches of nothing but establishing shots and just silent moments, and it just conveys so much emotion through nothing, if that makes any sense. And then as time went on, as I got older, I started getting more involved with like on the online comics communities, because over here in New Zealand we don't have a huge comics like industry or community because like whole bunch of socioeconomic issues. But through the online spaces, I found Sophia Foster Domino's comics, and through her she does these she does something in her comics where she plays with the concept of time a lot and space through the way that she compositions her panels, and it's very hard to articulate in words, which is why I love it so much. You know, like the fact that you are using this specific medium to convey something that you can't do anywhere else. I think that was the last time that I really felt like I'd learned something new in this medium.
Yeah, I feel like comics capture vibes in a way that few other mediums do.
I also had a very similar response when I first saw Sophia Foster Domino's work, because like it's just something about how the panels are composed and where they're placed just does something different, and just the understanding of sequence. And like that's something just kind of inherent to comics itself, because like if you have a page, you can compare it to the other surrounding panels, but like they're doing something really interesting with how their work functions.
Yeah, I think I really struggled to like figure out what it was that she was doing until I read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and like he really put into words like the fact that panels and the composition of panels and images is the whole point of comics, is that it's a portrayal of time and movement through space. And I think Sophia does a really good job of just messing with that entire concept.
Love this. I think I'm the only non-creator here, so this is like as elucidating as it is like immersive. Um, the next question actually comes from Kat. I asked the panelists if they had any questions they'd like to add to the conversation, and Cap was saying that they'd like to hear. Uh, was there ever like a comic or a sequence that broke you from the genre that you oriented toward naturally or originally, that like broke your like, oh, I could be into this as well.
Yeah, I mentioned contemporary, and when I say contemporary, specifically memoir and comic book memoirs have really just expanded my horizon as to kind of what I thought memoir could be, because traditionally I would go to like a writer's retreat and just see a bunch of individuals who were decades older than myself, and they would want to write their life story. And so I'm just like, all right, I'm too young to have this life story that is worth anyone really peering into. But I've had like friends like Laura Gao write Messy Roots, and just that in one particular, amongst many others, just really expanded what I thought the medium could do, because she goes back into the past and then into the present. And again, we're talking about this um, manipulation of time, but it just graphic novels in particular are so perfect for that. And so just seeing how she goes back and forth, or rather, um, like just yeah, it was just it's wonderful. And I would say graphic novel memoirs have really lately, like in the sequencing between them, um, that probably for me is what's been causing me to really think a lot.
Really interesting that it was also something that kind of jumped mediums for you too, because it's not just like with prose, it was seeing a different approach in a different medium that kind of made it click.
Completely, completely. And each time I read a new graphic novel memoir, um, I feel like I learned something new in terms of like what this medium can do.
I guess to answer my own question, something that kind of broke me, I tend to gravitate towards like, I mean, with comics, it's a visual medium, so obviously like a really interesting image will always like grab my attention if I see it like on a shelf or like amongst my friends' collections. And it's usually stuff that's in genre fiction, so like science fiction and fantasy, horror, just like something really out there and weird. But I actually have a copy with me, but like this is a slice of life. Oh, well, the camera's doing what it does. But this is Tetra to You by Iman Daydream, and it's just a slice of life, but it follows it's basically a T for T relationship, and if you don't know that acronym, it's like a relationship between two trans individuals, and it's just a very comedic slice of life where Tetra, who is the main character, basically is slacking off at her job and spends the entire time that her job is being robbed, flirting with the person robbing the store. And it was just, I don't know, visually a delight. Like I love this person's art, but it was just such an unexpected narrative um, that captured me.
Before we go on, Cap, could you hold it up or say the name again?
Yeah, Tetra to You by Iman Daydream, and I can add it to the Google Doc.
Lovely.
For myself, um, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I guess Sophia Foster Pino, her comics really like the whole messing with time thing really does help me break out of the kind of comics that I was making at the time, or the kind of comics that I wanted to make at the time, because that was very much like very early on in my career, not career, and the comics making experience. But after that, I think there's a comic called Asterios Polyp. I can't remember what the name of the artist actually is. Oh, God damn it. But I'll put in the name in the chat in case anyone I don't know what the book I'm in. But yeah, it's this. I don't know if I'd say that I like the story. The story isn't was kind of okay for me, but in terms of the art and the way that they convey the conflict, so it's about an architect the relationship between an architect and their artist's partner, and how the relationship is kind of falling apart, and as a result, the architect's life kind of falls apart. But the way that this is portrayed, the conflict between them is portrayed is through the ways in which the two characters are drawn and the two worlds are different are drawn. So the architect's like drawn in a very technical kind of very form heavy art style, and the artist is drawn in a very abstract, more expressive kind of impressionist kind of style. And he also uses different colored inks for the two characters and two worlds and the different objects in the house that like associated with them. And like it's just this beautiful thing where he really uses the visual medium of comics to convey something, convey the subtext. But more recently though, because that was about like 10 years ago since I read that one. But more recently, I picked up this, which is Wild, or I was supposed, or I was born to be, by Christian Costello. I've read a couple of his comics before, but this book is just absolutely stunning in so many different ways,
Oh, the color palette's lovely.
right? And it's like set in what? Actually, I'm not really telling. I think it's set in Texas. Oh, fudge. But yeah, it is very much like reminiscent of like I think it's like set in the 70s, and it's about a girl who joins a roller derby team against her mother's wishes, and she, for some reason, has the power of a famous legendary roller derbyist, I guess. And it's just it's just really fun, and I feel like for as long as I can remember, I've been taking comics way too seriously. And then I read this and I was just like, comics can be fun. Comics used to be very fun. And I was just like, it is silly, it is stupid. There's a scene where a girl can't go into a restaurant because she ate a bunch of spaghetti and didn't pay, and they have a picture of her up on the wall covered in spaghetti and saying that I'm the spaghetti I'm the spaghetti stuffer because she couldn't pay for it because she couldn't finish the meal and she stuffed spaghetti in her pockets. And I'm just like, this is so dumb. Like he's not taking himself too seriously at all, and I absolutely love that about it. But yeah, I think although I'm not as interested in making stuff that silly, I think seeing a book like this helped me kind of embrace self-indulgence, I guess. And it's definitely made me a lot more excited about making comics in the future.
It's funny you say that, Sloan, because I'm a
Mhm.
middle grade author mostly, and that translates to graphic novels. And so I come
Mhm.
from the silly, and I feel so artistically inspired by creators who are very serious and take the craft so
Mhm.
seriously that I feel like I'm watching like a Christopher Nolan movie when I'm reading a comic book. And so it's funny how we're coming at it from like different places.
Yeah, because I think it's very much like like what changes your perspective is so dependent on where you're coming from, right? Like your background, your context, etc., etc. And yeah, I just feel like this is just something so refreshing that I needed, that I've been needing. It's what I've been missing for a very long time.
I love that.
It sounds like a really fun read. Um,
I
I honestly
definitely
feel
highly
very
recommend
similarly
it.
with Tetra to you because I don't usually gravitate towards like slice of life comedy, and like the weird genre stuff that I enjoy is like sometimes the ones where it's like, oh, these devastating and like life-changing story arcs for the characters. Like getting something very, very off the cuff in comparison kind of help
Mm,
loosen things up.
yeah.
Okay, so we might have touched on this already. So if you've answered it one way before, answer it differently this time. Is there an issue, a run, a storyline in any particular comic that you're just like, this might have made me? one broke you and one's like, this is where I knew I was into comic books.
There are so many. There are so many.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
honestly, I'm gonna be basic and just say that Akira by Otomo Katsuhiro, like that was just what got me into it. Or either that or Dragon Ball. Because those two are the ones that kind of got me into it. Or Ghost in the Shell. One of those three.
So I think that I tell this. I'm starting to tell this story a lot, but I would say, fun. Like weirdly enough, Simpsons comics. I don't know if they've gone international, but like I used to like the show The Simpsons. It was such a comfort watch, and as a kid, so I have alopecia, so I don't have any hair due to that condition. And my parents would take me to the comic book store as a kid after doctor's appointments to make me feel better. And there was always a new Simpsons comic to pick up, and it always made me laugh and always made me really happy. And I was just so impressed by, similar to the show, their ability to come up with new material so quickly and be so prolific. Of course, probably a team behind it. However, it was still so impressive and inspiring that despite having just this contained world with these contained characters, they were able to do so much.
What about you, Kat?
So probably still that same series from before, because like I think I read that when I was like 7 or 8, and like I've been reading comics before, but like that was the one that made me think, wow, I want to chase making this feeling for other people. I want them to be just so overwhelmed and wrapped up in a story that it doesn't feel like just a book anymore. And that was like 7 or 8, and it took me like a long time to actually make my own comics besides just like little notebook scribbles. What kind of pushed me into doing it myself later in life was this series I read, The Wicked and the Divine by Jamie McKelvey and Kieran Gillen. Um, that's just like, I feel like there's entire essay series that could be done about just the narrative structure of that because they designed it so well for the publishing format that they were doing. And like obviously all narratives are flawed. It is not a perfect narrative, and I think sometimes like the limitations of like a 24-page story that's published monthly does kind of like it shapes the narrative beats in a way that doesn't always benefit the story. But like they worked that medium to like its utmost because there's 9 volumes and it's published on a monthly schedule, right? So you're getting like small chunks of a story, but it's bundled into 5-issue arcs. So each issue that came out, like each 5-issue bundle would be then released as a trade paperback for American or like models that are modeled on the American comic book industry. And they had designed the narrative. So like at the end of each arc, there's a massive change, of course. But then as you read each consecutive arc, there is a reveal that makes all of the previous revelations entirely different within that context. And by the time you get to the end of the series, you're thinking about it and you're looking at it, and you've had an entire crisis about just like the state of human existence and what it means to live forever, not like as an individual person, but to have a legacy that means something. And you're reading that final issue and you're like, wow, I have to start from the beginning because they've been hinting at it from the start. And it's just something that kind of like rankles at the back of the brain. And I was like, wow, you can do some very interesting things with this medium. I'm very jealous of these people. I want to do cool stuff like them. And that was a series that got me going, The Wicked and the Divine.
I think I think I'm older than some of you. And like Sloan, I inherited my brother's comic book collection. Um, inherit being a strong word. And so I grew up reading like Claremont 80s X-Men, which like primed me for, coming out and like existing in very white spaces because I wasn't used to that in the hood. But then I started reading his issues of the Teen Titans. And like at that point, like all DC, the reason that I like Marvel so much is because like the characters had problems. Like they there were things going on for them. And in DC, it was always like, look, we're all friends. We're having a team up. Oh, team ups are great. But then like the Teen Titans, like they were doing real shit. Like Wally West lost his powers, and like Roy Harper was a heroin addict. And I was like, you know what? It was essentially the experience of like watching soap operas and then like watching God. There's a show in the mid 2000s called Brothers and Sisters, and me and my friends make fun of it because it was like weird white people problems that are like non-problems because like there aren't really issues like no one's losing their housing, no one's. I was like, bro is on heroin. Like it doesn't get much better than this, and so that's when I was like, oh, comic books can be an instrument for social change or at least stronger self-reflection because at 6 I knew a couple of heroin addicts. It was good. uh okay, so next question. If you were to suggest to a non-comics reader, someone who is dubious about comics as a form or fashion of literature, and you were disqualified from recommending your own work, what do you think will be a strong entry point for someone who's maybe just moving from speculative fiction into comics or literary fiction into comics or TV to comics, whatever?
That's hard. Are they into anime at the time? That's easier, I think.
Let's say yes and no.
Okay.
They work for anime. What would you recommend?
First, give the anime. We can come back to you for the non-anime conversation.
Well, there's so many, but if I would say if they're into anime, the one that I think would really earn their respect, or one of the many that would probably earn their respect, would be Blade of the Immortal. That's one of my personal favorites. I just think narratively, the storytelling is so strong that I could have read that as a massive like trilogy or however many novels they would need for that, and just really respected it as a speculative fiction author. And if they're not, then The Magic Order by Mark Miller. And I think this was actually commissioned by Netflix, oddly enough. Like we're getting into comics, but um, the storytelling of this feels like it's a Netflix show that you're watching, and it just shows you how the medium can really capture you in that way. And the plot twist is probably the best I've ever seen. So I would say those two.
I'm gonna repeat George's point of this is a difficult question. Because like my go-to is usually just to ask them what stories they have enjoyed in the past. So like without like a genre descriptor like indication, I'm kind of flying into the storm. I don't know, I guess like the strategic approach is probably to recommend them like an anthology, because like if you can find an anthology with a genre that you already know that you like, then you get like a sampling of different people doing all sorts of work that could be relevant. Like there's nonfiction anthologies, there's fiction anthologies, and you can get like a range of creative styles. I really liked Piau's EX Mag anthology series. They just wrapped it up, I think last year. I'm bad with time. But they have a volume for cyberpunk. There's one for like dark fantasy romance. Well, no, there's romance,
Fantasy,
there's dark
romance,
fantasy.
ghost stories.
Hmm?
Fantasy, romance, and ghost stories, I believe it was.
Thanks. But yeah, no, like range of options, brilliant artists in every volume, and they're also just the design in Piau's books is just top notch. So like you can't really argue with the quality of comics you find there.
Yeah, no, I think I'm definitely gonna echo Cap's sentiments about Piau's books. Like, I have been a fan of Piau was a indie publisher. I say was because they recently just wrapped up the company, I guess. Is it a company? But
Yeah.
they recently just closed.
Publishing.
Yeah, publishing. Yeah, they're a small press, but they recently just shut down. I think because of, I guess, probably money issues. Because it seems like a lot of indie publishers are really struggling these days. But during their time, they put out so many incredible books. The one that I was actually going to recommend, Stages of Bronze. The sorry, the title is embossed glossy gold. But Stages of Bronze by Linnea Sturt is a especially if you're looking to recommend a comic for speculative fiction enthusiasts, I think it's an incredible book because it's Linnea does this writes a lot of stories about like Oh, fantasy ecologies?
Mm.
Like this one is about like this almost fantasy. It's like a very close common, very it's a marriage of fantasy and science fiction where she imagines the. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term whale fall. It's when in the ocean, when a whale dies, it'll fall to the bottom of it'll sink, the carcass will sink to the bottom of the ocean, and as a result, an entire ecosystem will form around it as scavengers gather to just pick at the meat, and then other bigger fish will come by to feed on those fish, and it just keeps growing, and it just keeps perpetuating this like beautiful interplay of an ecosystem, and it's this macabre yet hauntingly beautiful thing. And Linnaeus kind of imagined something similar in a more fantastical kind of science fiction setting. And she's also imagined like a nomadic culture that's what's the word? A nomadic culture that's developed around these whale falls.
Mhm.
And yeah, so Sage's Broad is basically just like exactly what it says on the label. It's about every stage of that rot and going through how this body is utilized by the ecosystem and the people around it. And it's just yeah. But otherwise, yeah, I would do also what Cap said, and normally I would definitely ask like what people are into, like figure out what it is that they're hesitant about in comics, figure out what it is that they enjoy, and then try and recommend something. And I think, yeah, the whole recommending an anthology is probably the best bet.
Well, now that we've recommended other people's work, let's go in the reverse order that we've been going in. So we're going to start with Sloan and talk about what it is that we're working on or what it is that people can grab of yours.
Oh my God. Um, I've been really bad about putting my stuff out lately, actually. I am supposed to be putting out the comic that I did for a comic books fair last year. I've been meaning to put that up on itch.io for ages, but that's not available at the moment. But you can check out some of my comics on my webpage, which I put in the chat. Yeah, mostly illustration work, a couple of my comics, samples of my comics really, but I will be putting them up online for sale at some point. Otherwise, at the moment, immediately after this month, I'll be starting work on a comic for the Short Box Comics Fair, which is happening October this year. Kat, is that right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
October every year.
Yeah.
Sloan's comic from last year is really great. You guys should check it out.
What's it called?
It's called the Nagarjuna.
What's it about?
So it's about a oh God, that's such a good question. It's so for the Nagarjuna, I actually did a grant application, and for the grant application, I had to explain what it was, and it was this whole mess of like realizing, oh my God, this entire setting is just like impossible to explain in a short summary, because I've just created this world where it's like a far-flung future where, for some reason, the entire southern hemisphere it's impossible to operate observatories because there's some kind of blanket of electromagnetism that's kind of just like blocked out to every X-ray observatory or any kind of radio observatory in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's also based around Maori and Pacific cultures where like navigating the seas by the stars and everything is super important. And as a result, astrology, astronomy,
Astronomy.
astronomy
Astronomy.
has become a very important part of this culture. And as a result, people have become very passionate about wanting to find a solution or there's like these two separate factions that become one that's like very passionate about finding a solution because they want to reconnect with the stars. And then there's another faction that's like, we can still see the stars. We don't need technology to be able to like appreciate them or utilize them to navigate the seas. But this story in particular is set on a spaceship that is on an expedition to find what they think might be the source of this electromagnetic interference. And they do end up finding it, and it turns out to be something horrifying, which I don't want to spoil, but it is very heavily inspired by movies like Alien and Sanitarium. What is it? Ah, lots
Pet
of space
Cemetery?
horror movies. Hmm?
Pet Cemetery?
No, but now that I think about it, you could say Pet Cemetery as well. But yeah, it's inspired by a lot of like space horror, cosmic horror stuff. Not so much in the sense that like not like cosmic horror and like the what's his name?
Lovecraft?
Yeah, not Lovecraft cosmic horror, but like um oh Sunshine cosmic horror. I don't know if you guys know Sunshine, but it's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, just people out in the void of space trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and because like I don't know, I think space is just horrifying as a concept. Like we're just in this vacuum of nothing, or in a sea of energy and particles that we can't see that will kill you given the opportunity. But yeah, that's me.
Hey, Cap, could you recommend something that's new or that people can buy and tell us what it's about?
Sure. None of the comics I'm working on now are going to be out anytime soon, but you can read my comic. I was also in the Shortbox Comics Fair last year. I won't be doing it this year, but it happens every October. So if you guys are looking for new reading material, it's great. It happens every year. Whole month of October. But my comic last year for that was Between Sand and Sea, which was initially supposed to be much scarier and like creepy and morose because it's a story of like a person losing their home and like trying to not losing their home exactly. So it's a story about like a small trans family. The dad falls in love and remarries and brings himself and his kid inland. The kid has never had any other parent besides their father, and it's heavily implied that their other parent is like the sea or just the concept of the ocean. So being removed and moving inland causes like a massive disruption to all of their lives, and to some degree, the sea follows them inland. And my plan was for this to be very, very scary. And then I had to like draw comics in my room for most of the summer. But I was like, wow, wouldn't it be nice if it was a cute beach story? I don't get a cute beach story because I'm indoors drawing. So it became a bit sweeter. But basically, a kind of mermaid follows them inland and kind of helps them figure out whether they want to stay inland with their parents or find the sense of home that they've been missing since they left. And it's kind of like the tension between sand and sea, but cha, um, and figuring out which relationship it is that they're going to pursue day to day, even though they still have these connections. It's figuring out how to balance it within their life. And then I had a different comic come out earlier that year called Satellite or STLT. If anyone knows Fooly Cooly, the writer was massively inspired by that. We both like the anime, and that's just an 8-pager, but it's up on both of our sites, and I'll provide links later. Um, and it's just a short 8-page comic about kind of a person's decision whether they're the last of humanity and they have a chance that may not work, but will require probably like the greatest sacrifice anyone can provide, which is like their own life. And they're deciding whether they're going to try and preserve the rest of humanity on this satellite as kind of like the last monument to that, living with the ship AI, or if they're going to risk it all and try and become like the opportunity for life, not just for human beings, but all life on Earth to restart again. Which is a lot to handle in 8 pages. It was an amazing script. It was very intimidating. Rico Taveras writes just brilliant stuff. Um, Let me pull up the links for that. So I guess my turn's over.
George, you've had lead time. Let's do it.
Sure. Yeah. I will not promote a comic book right now or just yet, but I'm going to promote a graphic novel, and or not a graphic novel, a regular middle grade novel, which is Shadid and the Alchemist of Alexandria. So it's Arab American Heritage Month here in the States. And so if you want to pick up a book that touches upon that, this is the perfect one for you. And it's also a lot of fun, and it's really great alternative to a certain really mean billionaire author who has a big IP. It's about a 12-year-old who discovers he comes from a long line of alchemists and is sent to the mysterious Alexandria Academy, a school for alchemy. And if you want to see how a graphic novel author would write a regular novel, this is your opportunity. So that's what I'm promoting here.
I mean, you can promote a comic book too. I mean, I was going to ask you what the most recent thing was, regardless.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess if you want to go into Goodreads and also find Tarek's Bizarre Adventure and like follow that for when it comes out, but I'll just promote another. I get a lot of advanced reader copies as an author to read, and I just got one called Saving Choopy, and it is like Lilo and Stitch but Puerto Rican, and it's by these two a Puerto Rican writer illustrator duo, Ronnie Garcia and Amparo Ortiz, and they do this we talk about like these fun, like hilarious comics. Like this is a really hilarious children's comic, and I really enjoyed reading it. So I guess support these two wonderful creators and this upcoming graphic novel.
Nice. So for me, we're at 42. And so we have some time. I thought that I would open it up to questions from folks in the audience, but also folks on the panel. So if you have questions for each other, that works as well.
Actually, George, can I ask, what made you want to get into? Actually, no, we are going to be in the same panel later about changing mediums, but I am wondering what made you want to get into writing a novel instead of working on the graphic novel?
Yeah, so when I grew up reading graphic novels and comics almost exclusively, as opposed to and manga, as opposed to actually reading regular novels, and I only got into regular novels like later into high school and college when I was kind of forced to read them. And I always like my master plan was always like I'm gonna get into graphic novels some way somehow. And for some reason, I decided that the best way for me to do that was to break into traditional publishing with regular novels first. Because when I was actually first breaking in, like again because of publishing's like ridiculous timeline, 5 years ago, I was like, well, there's no space for graphic novelists here. They're mostly in these indie houses. And lo and behold, by the time my book had been released, suddenly all anyone can talk about in publishing is graphic novels. And so it was a very natural thing. But at the time, I was like, okay, I have to build credibility for myself. And also, I enjoy regular novels too. And so I think I attribute a lot of my narrative style and voice from graphic novels and comic books, but it translated really well into children's literature, in particular young adult and middle grade. And that's kind of why I ended up going that route first. Yeah, good question. I listen, if there was a way for me to break into comics first, I would have done it. But I don't have the illustrating chops, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, comics is a notoriously difficult industry to break into or maintain, really.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks super
More
simple.
expensive.
Pretty straightforward. You just send out a couple of portfolios, it's fine.
It's just drawing, right?
Yeah, it's just drawing. It's
Oh.
fine.
Um,
Actually, LP,
so, huh?
can I ask, if someone wanted to get into like the classic X-Men or DC comics, would you recommend any like specific series or timelines
Yeah.
to get into? Because like I am really interested because like that is a history of like queerness that I'm kind of fascinated by, where like this is representation that's not quite explicit, but that's resonated very strongly with like the older generation.
Claremont can be
And
good for that.
Okay, so
Can and can't.
it's a yes and conversation because while in the late 90s through the 2000s, particularly with Bryan Singer, the advent of Bryan Singer to the X-Men mythos, the correlation between X-Men and queerness got stronger. But the X-Men started off as an allegory for communism. And then during the 80s and late 70s, Claremont really did a thing where he created the X-Men as the other and really built a mythology around that wasn't necessarily connected to anything, because the X-Men were white and they were Black and Russian during a time when people were afraid of communism. We were still in the middle of the Red Scare when Colossus showed up. And then thinking about Nightcrawler, who looked inhuman, right? And Sunfire, who's actually Japanese, and blah. So in my opinion, the X-Men didn't actually become queer. They were beatings of sticks and drums until the 2000s. So I feel like a lot of stuff that happened in the 2000s I think before that, a lot of that stuff was hard to collect. But if you start looking at the 2000s, that's when they started thinking about trade paperbacks as a stop thinking about single issues and start thinking about trade paperbacks as this is how we can get into bookstores, because bookstores didn't necessarily have the single issue carousels. And so there's a lot of that stuff, like the Grant Morrison run. Let's go back. If you want to look at 80s X-Men stuff, I think the one of the easiest ways to jump in is the New Mutants series. And I know they have the first 30 or so issues collected across a couple of volumes, because that way you get the X-Men, but you also get a new people coming in and finding their way. And I think that's a better entry point than look, we're the X-Men. I don't like you. You're Japanese. I was like, oh, great. We're going to follow these stereotypes.
Yeah. It is fascinating because I feel like throughout this entire panel, we've been talking about graphic novels and indie publications and middle grade graphic novels and stuff. But I realized that you were talking about the X-Men and Marvel, DC comics and Cape Comics, and I was like, I feel like there's this conflict between those two specific sides of comics, where I was just thinking of what's that? Yeah, come back to Scott McCloud, some understanding comics. There's that whole attitude of comics being undermined because it's seen as immature because of Cape Comics, but at the same time, I think Cape Comics deserve just as much respect as any graphic novel. And I think, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people who are getting into comics nowadays aren't giving. I'm not going to say that I know much about what Cape Comics are like at the moment, what Marvel DC is like at the moment, but
they are innovating. They are innovating because, and I don't know if LP you've read the new Teen Titans Kami Garcia run with Beast Boy and Raven, and they have a Robin one upcoming, and it's very YA kind of Riverdale-esque, and so they're updating it for a modern audience, and it's kind of romancy and whatnot. It's good.
I'm here for that. Coming back a little bit to what Sloan was saying, and then coming back to what you're saying, is that I'm a big, I talk a lot of shit about literary fiction, but the reality of it is that literary fiction and speculative fiction are pretty much the same thing. It's not the 50s, and speculative fiction writers are not writing stories where the people are vessels to tell a story about a spaceship, right? We're not doing that anymore. We're talking about people who are either extraordinary or in extraordinary circumstances, right? And literary isn't that. And I think it's the same thing with comic books. It's just because my life has been oriented toward Marvel and DC doesn't invalidate K-comics, doesn't invalidate indie comics, doesn't invalidate comics that aren't about people with powers. You know what I'm saying? So it's just there's just a lot to learn on all sides. And if you're well read, not me, then then you'll have a really great bird's eye view perspective. But if you're also niche down, you'll have a lot of insight into something specific that maybe someone else might not have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more.
I wanted to ask George. I find my first act in writing was as a my first act in writing was as a songwriter, and that brings a musicality as well as like a aptitude for dialogue into the prose that I write. What and you were talking about how you come to prose from the perspective of a comic book writer. What does that look like? How does that what what leg up did that give you coming in to writing books?
Yeah, absolutely. So visual storytelling, I think, is not something that's necessarily innate to a lot of folks. And so I got my chops looking at images and being that is like the main story, the dialogue and the narrative is secondary to how the illustrator and the writer have decided to visually tell this story. And so when I write, especially fantasy fiction, and to make it really pop and really conjure kind of this cinematic, exciting feel in the reader's head, I think it's knowing how to place the right details where. And I think reading graphic novels gave me a leg up there. You know, when I read a lot of because I teach workshops and whatnot, and what I read from a lot of new and upcoming authors is they're just not really knowing what details to show and where. And unfortunately, comic book writers and illustrators don't have the luxury of any wiggle room. Like you either show the right stuff or you don't, and it trains you in a way that is different than just coming up with regular novels. So I think that is probably the synergy that is most beneficial to no matter what medium you're working in, just being able to do less with more or more with less. Or maybe less with more too, I don't know. But more with less for sure.
I struggle with writing flash fiction, and so the idea of compressing dialogue description and things down into something like 8 panel wise, my hat's off to you. I love the medium, and so like I have a lot of respect for it. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, I've seen the controversial. I'm looking at you, Chuck Austin's X-Men run from the mid 2000s. But like, yeah, y'all are doing some really fantastic stuff, and like it's really an honor to be on this panel with y'all, and I'm so glad that you were here to share your expertise with me first and foremost, and then the rest of the audience here, because I've learned a lot. And this syllabus is on my Google Drive, so I'm going to get to go through all this by myself later on.
I'm
Or
jealous
Twitch
of
Trope,
that.
yeah.
I mean, you can also go onto the Google Drive and share that link. It's fine.
Mhm.
Do y'all want to go around the space and share your socials? I'm gonna start with Cap because I haven't started with Cap yet.
Oh, yes. So you can find me at my website, artsyward.com, and then my handle everywhere is Sevara, which is weird to spell, but it's Cevarra. And I also put that in the Google Doc if anyone needs it.
Great. Sloan.
Hi, I go by Plastic K on pretty much everywhere online. PLAES2K is supposed to be a play on words because people struggle with pronouncing Korean names, and I decided to mess with white people for always mispronouncing my Korean name. But yeah, I will just drop that in the chat just in case. But yeah, find me anywhere online and the Plastic K. And I think I've already dropped my webpage on there as well.
Nice.
Sweet. And I'm just at BY by George Drage, if you could manage to spell my very weird last name, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And then, of course, georgedrage.com if you want to head over to my website and just find everything.
Nice. And I'm at LP Kindred everywhere. I don't have a website, but you can also check me out at Voodoo Knots on Instagram and Twitter, or at Just Keep Writing 1 on Twitter, or at Just Keep Writing on Instagram. Yeah, it's been a gift. Thanks to y'all so much. You have just added to my never-ending TBR. So thank you, fuck you, and enjoy the rest of your con.